April 7, 1945. East China Sea. Dawn breaks over a gray horizon, and the sea smells of oil and salt. On the deck of the battleship Yamato, young men stand at their posts, eyes fixed toward the south, toward Okinawa. None of them know they are sailing into history's final chapter of the battleship age. Inside the radar room, Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida's hand trembles as he writes in his journal, "This cannot be what the admirals promised us." On his scope, hundreds of signals bloom like deadly flowers, spreading across the screen. The storm they had been told was impossible is already here. The greatest ship ever built, 72,000 tons of steel, 9 massive guns, the pride of an empire, is about to face an enemy it cannot even touch. This is not just the story of a ship, it is a story of belief, pride, and the moment when one nation's faith in its own power met the unstoppable truth of change. The Yamato's voyage is more than tragedy. It is the lesson the world learned through fire. In the early 1930s, the Imperial Japanese Navy faced a truth it refused to accept. It could never match the industrial scale of the United States, but rather than surrender to arithmetic, it turned to imagination, to ambition. The admirals believed that if Japan could not build many ships, it would build the most powerful ships. One vessel that could destroy 2, even 3 of the enemy. That idea gave birth to a legend, the battleship Yamato. In 1934, naval architect Kikuo Fujimoto presented a proposal that stunned his superiors. A ship of 70,000 tons, armed with 9 guns that dwarfed everything afloat, each barrel measuring more than 21 meters, capable of firing a shell heavier than a small car across 40 kilometers of ocean. The admirals listened in silence, their minds already seeing the headlines, the largest, the strongest, the invincible. It was not a design, it was a dream. Construction began in November 1937 at the Kure Naval Arsenal. The secrecy was absolute. Workers were forbidden to speak of what they built. Windows in nearby neighborhoods were boarded up, streets sealed, watchtowers posted to keep eyes away. Even the residents of Kure lived unaware that beneath their roofs, history's greatest battleship was taking shape. Those who labored on her hull described the sound of the hammering as a heartbeat, the pulse of a nation. But that pulse carried a dangerous rhythm. In the halls of the Naval General's staff, one voice, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, warned that the age of air power had already arrived. He had studied in the United States, watched aircraft carriers rise from experimental to essential. He cautioned, a battleship cannot fight a shadow from the sky. Yet prestige outweighed logic. Japan's rulers needed a symbol, not a strategy. When Yamato was launched in December 1941, 9 days after Pearl Harbor, she embodied everything the empire believed about itself: unbreakable, divine, destined. The world stood at the edge of World War II, and Japan believed it had created a weapon worthy of gods. Her hull shone like onyx beneath the winter sun. Crowds on shore cheered as the massive vessel slipped into the water for the first time. Her name whispered as both pride and prayer. She was magnificent and obsolete. While Japan worshipped armor and artillery, the United States was building factories, airfields, and carriers. In Detroit, Boeing, and San Diego, new aircraft rolled off assembly lines by the hundreds. In Tokyo, few wanted to hear such comparisons. For them, Yamato was proof that Japan could rival the West not only in war, but in spirit. The ship's completion became a national ceremony, a moment meant to show the world, and the Japanese people, that destiny still belonged to the empire. Yet among the crew assigned to her decks, pride mixed with unease. Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida, then a young radar officer, later wrote that the first time he saw the ship in harbor, he felt awe and fear in equal measure. "It was as if she were alive," he wrote, and already aware that she was born too late. The officers drilled endlessly on range finding, gunnery, and torpedo defense. The ship's interior gleamed, polished brass, white enamel, every surface reflecting the order and discipline expected of the Imperial Navy. But outside the docks, the world was already changing. In 1942, Yamato served as the flagship for Admiral Yamamoto himself during the Battle of Midway. She never fired a single shell. The entire battle unfolded far beyond her gun's reach, fought by aircraft whose pilots never saw her silhouette. 4 Japanese carriers were destroyed, and with them, the illusion of naval invincibility. Yamato turned back to Japan, her decks spotless, her magazines full, her purpose unfulfilled. Months turned into years of waiting. Anchored at Truk Lagoon, the mighty battleship became a floating barracks. Her sailors conducted drills under the tropical sun, patched paint that peeled from salt and wind, and watched the sky. They saw American bombers pass overhead unchallenged. They watched smaller destroyers come and go, their crews battle-worn and hollow-eyed. Yamato, the so-called guardian of the Pacific, had become a prisoner of her own weight. The irony was cruel. She was too large to hide, too valuable to risk, and too slow to matter. Every time she prepared to sail, Japan hesitated. Fuel shortages, air threats, the loss of escorts. She was, as one officer whispered, a god chained to the harbor. In Kure, engineers continued to modify her, removing secondary guns, adding anti-aircraft weapons, installing radar. The ship became bristling with guns, 162 of them, but the numbers masked a deeper truth. She could never bring them all to bear at once. Against a modern air strike, no battleship, however massive, could defend itself. Yet, the myth persisted. By late 1943, the empire was collapsing from within. American submarines choked Japan's supply lines. Oil convoys from the Dutch East Indies dwindled to nothing. Pilots were being trained with less fuel and more desperation. And still, in the dry docks of Kure, the Yamato stood, colossal, magnificent, and utterly alone. From the deck, Yoshida could see the mountains of Hiroshima rising behind the base. Sometimes, he wrote, he wondered if the admirals in Tokyo understood what the men at sea already knew, that Japan was running out of time. Every rivet we polished, he noted, felt like a prayer we no longer believed. The myth of Yamato was not built on steel alone. It was built on denial, the refusal to accept that the world had moved on. While American carriers launched waves of aircraft that could reach a target 200 miles away, Japan clung to the belief that armor and courage could substitute for air cover. It was a faith that would soon be tested in the most devastating way possible. By the spring of 1945, the empire had begun to crumble from within. Okinawa had become the next and final line between Japan and invasion. In Tokyo, the generals and admirals gathered around a map that had already turned red with loss. When Emperor Hirohito quietly asked, "What is the Navy doing to defend the homeland?" the room fell silent. The answer came not from reason, but from shame. Admiral Somu Toyoda, seeking to restore the Navy's honor, approved Operation 10 Go, Heaven No. 1. Its purpose was simple and tragic. The battleship Yamato would sail south with 1 light cruiser and 8 destroyers, attack the American invasion fleet off Okinawa, beach herself on the shore, and use her great guns as immobile coastal artillery until destroyed. Every man aboard knew it was a one-way journey. They were given just enough fuel for a single trip. There would be no return. Vice Admiral Seiji Ito, commander of the Second Fleet, called the plan what it was: suicide. He protested, arguing that the mission would waste men, ships, and hope. He was told the order came from the highest authority. That night, he walked the quiet decks of Yamato, feeling the cold wind off the inland sea. When dawn broke, he gave the order to sail. On April 6, 1945, at 1600 hours, Yamato departed Tokuyama for the last time. Her crew lined the decks, some waving toward the shoreline, others staring into the water that shimmered like glass. Before departure, officers told the men they were free to stay behind. None did. Those too sick or too young were ordered ashore. For the rest, destiny had already chosen its hour. American intelligence, intercepting radio traffic, already knew the fleet was coming. Submarines USS Threadfin and USS Hackleback shadowed the formation through the night, sending constant updates. By dawn, Yamato entered the East China Sea, surrounded by her escorts in a defensive ring, a tiny armada marching toward extinction. Above the clouds, Task Force 58 was already waiting: 16 aircraft carriers, 8 fast battleships, and more than 1,000 planes prepared for the strike. Vice Admiral Mark Mitsuru, calm and analytical, understood what lay before him: the chance to erase the last symbol of Japan's naval power. When radar confirmed Yamato's position, he ordered, "Launch all groups." At 1000 hours, the first wave rose from carrier decks like a living storm. Hellcats, Corsairs, Helldivers, Avengers, a name for every shadow that death could take. The pilots knew their target was the largest warship ever built. They also knew she had no air cover, only 6 outdated Zero fighters to protect her. "We are attacking a ghost," one pilot later wrote, "a ghost too proud to hide." At noon, Yamato's radar detected the incoming wave. The sky darkened with movement, hundreds of dots converging. Captain Kosaku Aruga, standing on the bridge, gave the order, "All stations, prepare for battle." The crew ran to their guns. The ship's 162 anti-aircraft barrels turned skyward. The sea exploded into thunder. The first bombs fell at 12:34. Massive shells fired upward in desperation. 18-inch guns designed for ships, not planes. They created vast blossoms of flame and shrapnel, but the aircraft flew through them unharmed. Torpedo bombers approached low over the waves, skimming the water so close that spray struck their wings. The first torpedo slammed into Yamato's port side near the bow. The entire ship shuddered. Metal screamed. For a moment it seemed she might endure. Damage control reported flooding but stable trim. Then came the second hit and the third. Bombs punched through decks, killing entire gun crews. Smoke poured from the midsection. Men carried the wounded below, slipping on blood and oil. The smell of cordite and burning paint filled every corridor. At 12:48, 2 torpedoes struck near the engine rooms. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes. The list to port increased. Captain Aruga ordered counter-flooding on the starboard side, sealing compartments with men still inside. More than 300 sailors drowned in the dark to keep the ship upright. Above them, the battle raged on. For 18 minutes, the first wave battered Yamato. When it withdrew, the ship still floated, scarred, burning, but defiant. Sailors cheered weakly as damaged American planes fell into the sea. Yet over the horizon, another wave was already coming. At 13:22, the second attack began. 50 planes from USS Essex and USS Bataan dove through the clouds. Bombs exploded along the port, bow, and bridge. One hit the forward turret directly, killing everyone inside. Fire spread to the magazines below. Yamato's guns continued to fire blindly. the recoil shaking her like an earthquake. From above, she looked like a volcano erupting in the middle of the sea. Then came the third wave. Over 100 aircraft, Hellcats, Avengers, Helldivers, descended in perfect coordination. They struck from every angle, focusing all torpedoes on the port side. The strategy was simple: flip the giant over. Between 1330 and 1400, at least 4 more torpedoes tore into her hull. Water flooded the engine rooms, extinguishing boilers one by one. The ship slowed to 5 knots, listing heavily to port. On the bridge, Aruga remained calm. He looked across the sea at his dying crew, their faces blackened with smoke, their hands still gripping guns that could no longer fire. "Abandon ship," he ordered softly. Few heard him over the roar of fire. Vice Admiral Ito retreated to his cabin and refused to leave. Some said he sat in silence, staring at a portrait of his wife until the lights went out. At 1420, Yamato capsized completely. 2,000 men were still aboard. The ship rolled onto her port side, her massive guns swinging downward like gravestones. Then came the explosion. The forward magazine ignited, and the blast tore the ocean apart. A mushroom cloud rose 20,000 feet into the sky, a vision of the atomic age to come. The shockwave damaged aircraft overhead, flipping some upside down. For miles the sea boiled. When the smoke cleared, Yamato was gone. Only oil, debris, and bodies floated where she had been. Of her crew of more than 3,000, only 276 survived. The entire attack had lasted 1 hour and 46 minutes. American losses, 10 planes. The numbers told a story no admiral could deny. In World War II, courage without air cover was suicide. Back aboard the carriers, pilots returned in silence. They did not cheer. They knew they had witnessed the death of something larger than a ship. It was the death of an era, the moment the battleship, the once god of the seas, yielded to the new dominion of the sky. From that day, every admiral, every strategist, every historian would remember the lesson written on the waters of the East China Sea. Power is not permanence, and pride is never armor. When the waters closed over the wreck of Yamato, Japan's last illusion sank with her. For years, the Imperial Navy had called the ship Unsinkable. But on April 7, 1945, the myth shattered under the weight of its own arrogance. The government announced the loss to the public days later, cloaking it in heroism, a noble death for the defense of Okinawa. Yet even the censors could not disguise the truth. Yamato had accomplished nothing. She had sunk without firing a single shot at the invasion fleet. In American newspapers, the victory was reported with clinical precision. Headlines read, "Largest Japanese battleship destroyed by carrier planes." But among the officers of Task Force 58, celebration was muted. Admiral Raymond Spruance later said, "It was not a battle. It was an execution." The men in the cockpits had done their duty, yet few felt triumph. They had seen courage twisted into tragedy, technology defeating tradition in the most merciless way. In Japan, the shock was profound. Yamato had been more than steel. She was the embodiment of national pride, the floating heart of an empire. Her loss felt like the silence after a great bell had been struck. The echo lingered long after the sound was gone. Families of the fallen received no bodies, only folded flags. For many, that emptiness became the moment they realized the war was already lost. American analysts quickly dissected the battle. The after-action reports from Task Force 58 confirmed what the past 3 years of war had proven. Aircraft, not armor, ruled the sea. Dive bombers suppressed anti-aircraft fire. Torpedo planes finished the kill. Concentrating torpedo hits on one side caused rapid capsizing, a technique that would influence naval warfare for decades. Strategists concluded that 100 bombers, well coordinated, could annihilate any surface ship in existence. In the months that followed, Yamato became a case study at the Naval War College. Officers learned how carrier aviation had rendered surface fleets obsolete. The lessons of the East China Sea shaped the design of every navy for the rest of the century. The age of the battleship, once the crown of military power, was over. Air superiority had become destiny, but the deeper lesson lay not in tactics, but in humanity. The story of Yamato revealed the cost of pride, of leaders who mistook sacrifice for strategy. Japan's admirals had sent over 3,000 men to die not for victory, but for symbolism. The empire wanted to prove it still possessed spirit. Yet spirit without reason is destruction. The sea remembers that difference. In one of his later writings, Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida reflected on that day. "We were told our deaths would inspire the living. But I wonder how many lives might have been saved if our admirals had learned to doubt themselves instead." His memoir, Requiem for Battleship Yamato, became a quiet act of rebellion, a soldier's truth against a nation's propaganda. He described not only explosions and orders, but faces, voices, laughter that ended mid-sentence. His words helped post-war Japan confront its grief, not with glory but with honesty. As World War II drew to a close, that honesty became rare and precious. Hiroshima burned. Tokyo lay in ruins. The same industrial force that had once built Yamato now lay buried beneath rubble. The contrast between the massive battleship and the shattered cities symbolized a nation's reversal, from steel to ash, from pride to humility. And yet, from those ashes, Japan would rebuild. The United States, too, carried lessons home. American commanders saw that technology could win wars, but not peace. They had witnessed what air power could do to a single ship. Soon, they would see what it could do to entire cities. In the months after Yamato's sinking, the atomic bomb was tested in the New Mexico desert. Within 4 months, Hiroshima and Nagasaki would join Yamato beneath the shadow of the same mushroom cloud. After the war, the image of Yamato changed. In Japan's collective memory, she became less a weapon and more a requiem. A generation grew up seeing her not as a monument to power, but as a warning. Films like Space Battleship Yamato reimagined her as a vessel resurrected to save humanity, not destroy it, transforming tragedy into hope. The 2005 film Yamato portrayed her final voyage through the eyes of ordinary sailors, not admirals. It reminded viewers that the meaning of war lives not in strategy, but in faces. At the Yamato Museum in Kure, a 10:1 scale model of the ship stands beneath soft lights. Visitors walk along her decks, reading names engraved in glass. Some stop and bow, others simply stare at the massive guns, silent and still. Outside, schoolchildren look out over the same harbor from which she once departed. The water is calm. Time has forgiven what men could not. Among historians, debates continue. Was Yamato a masterpiece of engineering or a monument to failure? The truth lies between. She was both the pinnacle and the end of a philosophy, proof that human genius can create marvels even when guided by delusion. The steel of Yamato was flawless. It was the purpose behind it that was broken. In the years since, every warship built has carried her ghost. Modern carriers and destroyers may look different, but they share the same paradox, humanity's brilliance bound to its blindness. As one American pilot wrote years later, "We didn't sink a ship that day, we sank an idea." And perhaps that is why Yamato still matters. She reminds us that courage can live inside a lie, that loyalty can serve madness, and that the line between heroism and tragedy is thinner than we wish to believe. Her wreck lies 340 meters below the East China Sea, divided into two great sections. No salvage crews disturb her. The men who died aboard remain entombed with her, guardians of the lesson they never lived to see fulfilled. Because in the end, every empire learns the same truth. The sea takes what pride will not surrender. The sea is calm now over the place where Yamato sleeps. Sunlight ripples across the surface, and schools of fish drift between the ruins of her steel bones. Time has gentled the water, but not the memory. The ship that once embodied a nation's pride lies silent, not defeated, but at peace. In the story of World War II, Yamato stands as both monument and mirror. She shows us what happens when pride becomes purpose, when leaders mistake sacrifice for strategy. Her builders believed they were shaping invincibility. Instead, they forged a tomb for thousands. The guns that once promised victory never fired a shot in defense of their homeland. They became relics, swallowed by a sea that judges all nations equally. For the United States, Yamato's end was a signal that the world had changed. The industrial strength of democracy had triumphed over the arrogance of empire. Yet even victory carried its own burden. The same air power that ended one war would soon unleash horrors upon cities and civilians. The lesson of World War II was not simply that freedom prevailed, but that humanity stood on the edge of its own destruction, a moment when technology outpaced mercy. And for Japan, Yamato became the face of reflection. She was the perfection of engineering and the failure of wisdom, the echo of a time when dying for one's country was considered more honorable than living to rebuild it. In post-war Japan, the memory of the ship transformed from pride to prayer. Her name became a synonym for endurance, not conquest. Every generation finds its own Yamato, its own illusion of strength. For some, it is wealth. For others, ideology. But the sea teaches a single truth. Nothing built on pride can stay afloat forever. What endures are the hands that build, the minds that learn, the hearts that choose peace over glory. Today, veterans of World War II grow fewer each year, but their stories remain. They are not tales of triumph alone, but of loss, humility, and reconciliation. The ocean that claimed Yamato now connects nations once divided by war. Her wreck, resting quietly beneath the East China Sea, reminds us that even the greatest ships sink, but the lessons they leave behind must not. So, if this story moved something in your heart, do not let it end here. Like, share, speak, and tell someone younger what the sea once taught the world. We must fight for peace. We must fight for justice. We must fight for freedom. Because history is not finished. It waits for those brave enough to remember.